All right.
All right. Welcome to the Disruptors. This is actually our final episode of this season. And so today we're going to really do a look back at season 1 of the Disruptors and what we learned and looking ahead to the future, as well as really talking about, because, this is really what we do, is defining what it means to be a DEI leader. And we've learned so much over the past however many months. It's been about 20 episodes, 21 if you count the open Q&A we did. And so we've had the privilege of learning from a diverse group of leaders, folks in the tech space, folks who are DEI specialists, anti-racism educators, and just feel so lucky and privileged to have been part of this. So we really wanted to take the time today to honor this journey that we've been on and also talk a little bit about what this means for the Disruptors in the future. And so if you're new here, I am Jasleen. I'm an ICF certified coach. I coach a lot of women in tech and other male-dominated spaces. My background is in HR, and I'm also co-founder of the Disruptors.
Yes. And I'm Alexandria, the other co-founder of the Disruptors, and very, very grateful for Jasleen and her presence within the Disruptors and everything that we've been able to learn together. I am also feeling very privileged in all the access that we've had to other people sharing their knowledge and being in the world. So I'm an executive leadership coach, professional pivoter. I started out in adulting as a counselor and therapist with the Department of Corrections. I moved into leading tech departments, and then I wanted to bridge the two worlds. So I became a coach, and being in the coaching space, helping leaders become more human-centered leaders, and then wanting to be more in the space of helping companies be better companies for the workforce that is there and the future of work that we are all actively living in so that we can all thrive, because I think that we do have the right to thrive in our workspaces and in our lives. And I'm super excited to look back on this season and then to talk about what's next, because we have a lot of things coming.
Yes. And so I'm curious, Alexandria, what have been kind of the key highlights or learnings on this season for you?
Yeah, there's been a lot. And I think one of the major learnings that I've had was I came in to starting this with you as a job board and was like, oh, the solution that we need to have is we need to connect people who are qualified talent with the companies that they can thrive in. We just need to create the bridge for them. And then realizing that chasm is actually much wider than just a single bridge to go over it, and realizing that the need of the community has way more to do with adjusting the systems and the leadership and bringing in education so that the talent can thrive, and that being only one of the pillars that we need to make movement on.
100%.
And just seeing, knowing logically that there's so much work and it's a community effort to do all of this work, but then really honing in on all the work that is actually there and feeling the amount of work in my body, I think was also the other major learning.
100%. I feel like this last almost, I think it's been almost a year. How long has it been? It hasn't even been a year yet.
No, not quite. It would be a year in October.
Yeah. And I think we've learned so much, because there's one thing to when you're starting a business, because we're not just this podcast, we have an actual business. And so as we were starting this, we really wanted to fill that gap of people are asking for diverse qualified talent. And we wanted to match that diverse qualified talent with inclusive organizations. And I think it's been a principled exercise for us as well to say, how sure do we feel about placing this talent in these organizations? How can we really ensure that this is going to be an organization where all types of people thrive and they understand what it means, not just on paper, but the behaviors and all of those kind of leadership attributes that go into diversity, equity, inclusion, like how do we really make sure that's there? And that's kind of how we've evolved from this matching to we're still doing that and expanding it to saying we really need to create a DEI ecosystem, because like, you know, even in this like looking back at the season, like we've talked about some really thought-provoking things, and I love that we have this podcast that we can educate people on anti-racism. You know, I'm thinking back to Black History Month. We had some amazing guests. I really loved the Hold Your Ally cookie episode when we were talking about, you know, in March we talked about how we're advancing women in male-dominated spaces, and this whole like confidence issue that we see, and also just understanding the difference between culture add and culture fit. All of this is so important, and it's important to educate ourselves on this, but education is not enough, right? It's building that ecosystem. And so I feel like that's been one of the biggest learnings for me, is that that's where the real gap is. Like where people say that the gap is like, oh, I need diverse talent, I need to look more diverse. It's not just about that. It's about like really truly understanding equity. And I think we really need, even the launch episode, I really loved that rich, deep conversation we had in the launch episode of what equity really means at its fullest. And so I think I love where we are right now. I'm super excited about what's to come. And we've developed these pillars, right? And so we're piloting this with organizations as we speak and learning even more. And we've done a lot of research about not just how these leadership pillars, or kind of supporting, holding up the ecosystem where diversity, equity, and inclusion will thrive without that one person, that one leader, that one DEI focal. It's not just about that, but it's really about just getting on the journey and understanding why you're on the journey.
Yeah, I love what you're talking about there with the pillars upholding the ecosystem, because that's what it is, right? We all need support systems and systems to operate and to be. And when you have everything focused in on one person, one department, one initiative, it's not balanced, it's not sustainable, and it's not going to be achievable either. It'll be short-lived, like, oh, we did the training, check the box, move on. That's not creating change, right? That's maybe a moment, and maybe you spark change in somebody, but it's not at the organizational level. And for it to actually make a difference, it's at the organizational level. And to be able to sustain your business, you have to have this woven into the business as a whole, because that's how people thrive. And when people thrive, your business thrives.
Yeah. And that's one of the things in our research that we found. The reason why most DEI programs fail is because it's very reactive. It's very much a knee-jerk reaction to something that's happening, or, you know, it could be a PR crisis. It could be, you know, an employee group who is saying that, you know, they're feeling undervalued. It could be a knee-jerk reaction to, you know, low engagement scores that you're seeing in your organization. But it needs to be more proactive, and it also needs to be integrated strategically into your business plan, because that's one of the biggest gaps. It's like when DEI, when diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives feel like separate from the business, a check in the box exercise, something that takes you away from or is competing with business results, then of course it's not going to be sustainable. And of course it's not going to be good for your business. And so we really want to bring to light all of this research that has been done for the last like 30 plus years. There's like a significant body of research that tells us that these inclusive leadership behaviors lead to higher engagement, higher productivity, higher business outcomes.
Mhm.
And so in our program, we've built that in. We've built in measuring these exact things at the beginning of the program, and we measure it at the end of the program to make sure we're moving the dial on the pieces that are not just about diversity, equity, inclusion. It's about your people and how they're producing good work and how there's an environment where they can be creative and innovative and solve the business problems.
Because that's what
Right?
people want to do. People want to engage in their work. People want to feel valuable, to feel needed, to feel wanted, to have purpose, and to be able to connect their purpose to something outside of themselves. Like that's how humans operate. And so if you don't create an environment in which that's true, then your people aren't thriving and your business isn't thriving. Then you're going to have attrition and people are going to leave. And then you're left with knowledge gaps and reduction in productivity because now you need to backfill that position and you have loss of knowledge in ways that you'll never get it back. It doesn't matter how much you document things and systematize things. That person is taking them. And they offered something to your company that cannot be replaced because they, as an individual, have an individual experience and way of thinking. And when they leave, it's gone forever.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you can't tap into that talent, like you aren't going to survive in this economy. You're not going to survive in the future of work that isn't about just having someone sit at a desk and push around paper or do kind of those transactional things. Because the way that tech is disrupting all industries, we need to really be moving towards strategic thinking. We need to be moving toward the soft skills of how we're like connecting with people. And like not just as a leader connecting with your employees, but as your whole workforce connecting with your customer base, understanding psychology, understanding what really makes people tick, what are their barriers, what are the barriers inside your organization, because that's part of what this ecosystem does that we help people implement, right? Because we've got 4 pillars. And so we're really now talking about what is a DEI leader.
Yeah.
And so a DEI leader is someone who understands that it's not just about them, not just about them saying and doing the right things. It's about creating that ecosystem. So I want to speak to those 4 pillars. Those 4 pillars are, number 1, our leadership. And that doesn't mean just having one good leader or one good DEI person. That means you have a whole leadership team, leaders at all level who are understanding and learning what equity is, because there's a difference between equity and equality, right? And we've spoken about this on this podcast before, so I won't go into too much detail about what that is, but just really understanding how you're removing barriers from an equity lens, how you're conducting business from an equity lens, and understanding why that is driving better business outcomes. So really going through that learning process of not just hearing it, but experiencing it and seeing in real time how those shifts in leadership behaviors will start positioning your business for the future. And so it's about that leadership. It's about the behaviors. It's about the communication. That's all pillar number 1. And then pillar number 2 is the education. A lot of what we do here on the podcast is really understanding. And this is the piece where I feel like, I don't know about you, Alexandria, but I come across a lot of leaders who they just want to prove what they know. They want to prove that they're, with it, quote unquote, woke.
Yeah, but they're centering themselves, right? Which is antithetical to the entire purpose.
Yeah. So it's about like not centering yourself. And so that education pillar is not about what you know, but it's about accepting that you're not going to know everything. And so we're not here to tell you what to think. We're here to challenge the way you think. I think, Alexandria, you said that to me once in a meeting, and I was like, yes, it's not about, we're not telling people what to think. We're teaching them how to think from an equity lens, not just from an equity lens, but also like what is going to engage, motivate, coach, develop your employees.
Yep. Because you can't, the what to think, right? Like that's giving somebody a fish. Think this, regurgitate that, right? Which is what the school system, specifically in the US, I assume Canadian school systems are the same, right? It's about rote memory and regurgitation. That's not how to think. And that's systematized, and that's not going to create innovation, because then you're not thinking. You're doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Where when you know how to think, then you have a decision-making framework that you can plug things into and then decide when you have new situations, because you will have new situations that you're like, there's not a roadmap for this. No, but if you have your framework of how to think, then you can make those consistent decisions in a way that is diversity, equity, and inclusion focused, is human centered and focused, which is what allows people to thrive, and how you avoid making those decisions that end up as PR nightmares. Because you did the same thing that you've been doing, and like, we're not doing that anymore.
And it takes away that discomfort too, because always being like, oh, what should I say? What should I do? I'm going to write the email, or it's always coming from the optics perspective. And that's how you become a performative ally. And the world is becoming very good at spending their money now. Because like, especially they've done a study on Gen Z, and Gen Z is not as loyal to brands as the previous generation. So every generation is getting less and less loyal to brands, because they're watching, they're looking to see how you're making decisions. They're looking to see that you understand the people that you serve, that you're connected to people, and that you're treating your employees well. That is,
Bon Appetit is a prime example of that, right? Like, you've got all of these people from different backgrounds on your show, but then at headquarters, you're paying them differently and you're not treating them very well. And then they start speaking out about it, and it's a problem.
Yep. And like, if you're going to go and spend all this money on this expensive brand only to learn that the employees are getting paid pennies compared to what the leaders are making at that organization, and you understand that their margins are huge because of it, then you're not gonna shop there anymore. I know I won't. And I think, I don't even belong to Gen Z. So I think Gen Z is even opening up the eyes of the older generation and like helping us understand this. So that's kind of education. It's not about the training, because I think that's the other reason why most DEI programs fail, is because we look at it as a one-off training. Here's the bias training, and research shows that bias training is forgotten in approximately 2 days. And so you take the bias training, you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to do these interviews, and I'm going to, I'm going to really look at, what my biases are and what the barriers are for these folks from an equity lens. And then the next day, you go back to your normal schedule. The day after, everything is the same. And so again, it's about the unlearning, because if you have to unlearn first to relearn and start practicing a new mindset. Because if that isn't happening, you're just going to revert to the old ways, and your DEI training investment you're not going to see any return on that.
Yep. And the other thing, right, because we forget about that implicit bias training or unchecked bias training immediately, you don't then go apply it to the systems and really unpack the bias that is in the systems that you have within it. So that's why the education is important to then, for our pillar that you'll talk about here in a second, within the systems, or even within your interviews, right? So if you take the anti-bias training, then immediately go try and change some of your systems, because that's fresh and you can change it. Then it's built in.
100%. So that is one of the other pillars. That's the third pillar, is you can't create that DEI ecosystem where it's like, and Alexandria, you and I were talking about this because, I worked in oil and gas, and I worked in a company that really valued safety. And so when we were thinking about developing this program, we thought about how was it that at that company, we were able to, like, it became so ingrained in what you did. It went beyond the training.
Right.
In fact, I don't even remember any specific safety training that I took, right? Because it was so much ingrained in all of the leadership behaviors. It was ingrained in the systems, right? And so it was, how do we create a system around it? It's the policies. The policies are part of the system, the HR policies, all the people-facing policies. It could be policies that you already have that haven't been written from an equity lens. And so having those policies there, we help you write those in a way that's inclusive and in a way that sustains that ecosystem and the business results. Right? Because if you look back at history with this old patriarchal command and control style of leadership, which goes against, most literature that proves that servant leadership is the way to go. It's about, let's make rules, let's make policies to control people, but coming at it from a different lens of how are these policies supporting the ecosystem that allows the employees to thrive instead of trying to control them. These are humans. Everyone needs autonomy, especially in this day and age where we want innovation, where we want people who aren't just simply, putting something into Chat GPT and right? We need to think critically.
Yes.
And so if you've got critical thinkers, the policies are just there as guideposts to help you understand, help guide you, and also they create that ecosystem. And then it's also about the other people, systems, and processes that are really going to support, and that is like any sort of the tools that you're using to get people to perform, right? It's not about necessarily dangling the carrot, but also just like, how are we rewarding people? How are we motivating, coaching, developing people? What are these parts of the system that are going to be automated that we're making sure that it's happening? And of course, that has to be coupled with those leadership behaviors, so the leaders know their role in that system. But it's the creating the system. There's other pieces to it. I don't want to go into all the details, but like creating that system, or the systems within the system, I guess is more a better way of saying it, is so that when your leaders turn over, when the people turn over, it doesn't matter. It's just there. So going back to that safety example, it's like, the safety leader changes, but it doesn't matter. The team has already created a system around having those safety stand downs every morning, talking about these issues. It's become so ingrained and normalized that at every meeting, someone's saying, hey, I noticed something. And that's a piece that also we measure in the employee survey that we developed, is psychological safety. Because if people don't feel comfortable saying, hey, I noticed something, what is not inclusive, is not equitable, or I want to just have a conversation about this, or I've been treated in a certain way that I don't think is aligned to our values and our policies, then we need to look at that holistically. Right? Anything else you wanted to say about the systems, Alexandria, before we move on to the next pillar?
You know me, I am such a systems human that I operate super well within systems, and I love creating systems because it's ease, right? It's ease of being. I spent the time and effort to create the system in which then I can just be in. And it's not to say that you don't come back to adjust them. You have to, right? You do the system. Is it working? Is it working? Is it working? You have the psychological safety for somebody to be like, hey, it's not working. Great. Now we can adjust it and get better. And really living by that motto of, once you know better, you can do better. And we can create all of these things that make it easier to do business. A lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to engage in DEI because it's hard work and it's going to take a lot of effort and we have limited resources and all of these things. Like, sure, there is effort to be put into it. And once you have put that effort in, it's there and operating, and you get to operate within it and get the benefits of that operating within the system that you took the time to put effort into, to really make it about equity versus equality, right? Like, you can't rule by the lowest common denominator. That's not good for anybody. But readjusting and being open and having the space for the innovation to actually come through because you are thinking less about it. You're just doing it. You're just living it. And like with Shell, it being safer.
Well, and that's it. Like, that's what I was thinking when you said that, with ease, right? Because like we know DEI, when it comes to like diversity and managing diverse talent, that's not easy.
No.
But it feels easier when it's not a push, but it's a pull.
Yes.
Right. And so that's been my experience in the DEI space. I have sometimes felt like I am pushing instead of that vision pulling people along, and systems help automate it and create that ease, because again, you have your guideposts in that system, you have your policies, and so you revert back to those when you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so we need to make sure those are the right policies and the right guideposts for you. And so we're making it easy for you. But ease does not mean then you don't have to be accountable. So it's, again, the system creates the ease, and the accountability is built in for you. Right?
Like even bringing it to a specific example, like interviews. Does it sound easier to have an interview that every interview feels like a brand new interview that you have to show up for, create new questions for? How am I going to do this? What am I going to ask? How would I know? Or if you have a skills matrix in which you are looking for a specific set of skills with success metrics of how you would know if you found those skills or not and how they're applicable, and you had a set of questions that you could directly compare candidates to one another because they all answered the same questions.
And that's the perfect example of how DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, is not just a nice thing to do or a luxury. It's good for business, because once you standardize and you understand, because like that, this is where you start to get, and this is a perfect segue for the final pillar, which is talent, right? Once you understand what your talent looks like today, what are the skills we have in this organization? How is the world evolving? How is the business evolving? And like, where are we going? Because that's one of the exercises we do with leaders is, this is your current reality, because we do a gap assessment at the beginning. This is where you want to be, not just in terms of like, this is how diverse. Yes, we're going to have that too. And also that's another challenge, is people don't understand how they should define diversity. And so here is what that diversity looks like. Here's what, the inclusive behaviors or the education that needs to happen. But also, where do you need to be as a business in terms of the profit, in terms of the market that you are trying to capture, and how you want to evolve and grow and scale. And then we're just looking at creating that tension to get you there. And so these pillars help create not just the tension to move the business there, but it gives people motivation, because they understand, they see the vision, and they see how they fit into the vision.
Yes.
Because you're including them in the vision. That is what inclusion is, where people can be at a company and say, okay, I really feel connected to this mission. I understand my role and how I am going to get the business there. And then you don't have to revert to these command and control style of leadership, because employees understand, and they understand how they will be rewarded in that system and for what behaviors, and it creates team cohesion, all of the things that are going to get your business to that reality that you have in your mind. Because you as a leader can't just have that in your mind. It needs to be instilled and ingrained in the behaviors of the organization.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, the talent pillar is just super important, because it's not just about diversity. It is about diversity. We're not saying that, but it's more than that. It's more than that. And I think that's when people think about diversity, equity, inclusion, they focus more on the diversity piece. And so that's kind of where we started, was kind of meeting that gap of saying, you want diversity, we're going to help you get diversity. But again, it comes to that principled question of, but if we don't know the inclusion and equity is there, why are we putting diverse talent in a place where they're just going to leave anyways, because they don't fit in?
Yeah, because it's the same problems that have been there. It's the systemic and the core that is causing the attrition issue, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can attract talent in, like that's one piece of getting people to come to you to apply for the job, to accept the job, and all those things. But then once you have the talent in the door, what are you doing to sustain that talent? What are you doing to help them thrive, to feed them, to connect them with the purpose? And like, that's a huge part of being a human-centered leader, is being able to help people align themselves, their values, their core with the business, right? So you have that pull. It is always easier to move towards something than away from something. And so being able to have everybody moving towards the same thing, it's powerful. Our most favorite brands, that is what they are doing.
Yeah. Totally. And you need to have empathy and vulnerability to do that. So if we're really talking about the traits or the competencies you need to start cultivating as a DEI leader, one is empathy. Two is decentering, which is really part of empathy, right? It's putting yourself in their shoes, not just your shoes. And like a perfect example of that is that video that's going viral right now on TikTok. I think I told you about that earlier today, Alexandria, where there's this CEO who is saying, you know, I've been getting a lot of messages from people, some nice, some not so nice. And I just want to say that you got to leave the pity party. You got to leave the pity party. Don't worry about your bonuses. Get us to this amount of profit, and then we'll worry about the bonuses. Meanwhile, this person got their bonus and their total compensation, because people got receipts and they put those out there, was $5 million. And so it's like, how out of touch are you as a leader that you can't see why your employees are angry with you?
Yep.
And so this is why it really helps to do this with people who are coaches, people who have the HR background and the understanding of because you can't just take the system and like cookie cutter implement it. You can't just take the ecosystem and say, boom, everything's perfect, everything's fixed. You have to start where you need to start. We meet you where you are, because if you have an organization that's very much disgruntled, and like maybe you have sent tons of employee surveys before and have done nothing about it.
So you have
right? We may not start there. We may not start there because we know we're just going to piss off your employees, because they're going to feel like you need to earn some trust with them before you start asking them for things. Right. And so it's really recognizing, okay, what is the climate like? What are we really need to go in there. So we're developing this DEI Gap Assessment that is going to be hopefully like in a quiz format. And by the way, if you're watching this on LinkedIn Live, or even if you're listening to this on podcast, go to LinkedIn and comment Disruptors on this video if you want to have access to that as soon as it goes live. It's basically the same assessment we walk through with folks anyways, and this will help you understand underneath each pillar where your gaps are. So comment that below if that's something that interests you. But once we meet with you, we take it a step further to understand the nuance and complexity of your business and really customize the approach to meet your people where they are, meet your business where it is. Because again, DEI programs are always going to fail if they're not integrated with the business results. It needs to be mission critical. This goes back to what we've said time and time again on here, is as a leader, you need to understand your why. So you need to have the empathy. You need to understand your why. You need to decenter yourself. You need to stop trying to be perfect, and you need to build the system.
100%. And I think even talking specifically about, like, you know, why do we meet you where you are, right? Why is that important, right? Well, that is what equity is. There is not a one size fits all. This is not a check in the box exercise. It is a journey, and it is continuous, and everybody is starting in a different place. And there will be different systems and different programs and different needs within each organization. Are there themes? 100%. But one person who may thrive at company A may not thrive at company B,
Mhm.
even if both companies are diversity, equity, and inclusion focused. Equity is not equality. It's not equal. It's not the same. It's being in what's needed and providing what's needed in the moment. And so we are showing up in our program with our core value of equity.
Yeah. And if you can't answer the question of what is the difference between equity and equality, that is a starting point for you. Because I feel like just recognizing that, because we've all been conditioned, we've all grown up with this myth of equality.
Yes.
Like we all should just treat everybody the same.
Yep.
In a perfect world, well,
Sure.
I'll say not in a perfect world we could do that, because everyone is going to be different. And so what you see as fair treatment isn't going to be the same as what I see as fair treatment. What you see as motivating isn't going to be the same as what I see as motivating. So if we go back to that golden rule that we've all been indoctrinated, treat others as you want to be treated. It's about now we're shifting, and times are forcing us to shift to this platinum rule of not treat others how you want to be treated, treat others how they want to be treated.
Which is inclusion.
Which is, again, leaders need to start disengaging from this idea of they need to be perfect to be the leader. And it takes the pressure off of you too, to be like, I don't know all the answers. I need to check and say, hey, I gave you this advice because that's kind of what I would want to hear, or that's what I would have projected onto my younger self. And then actually say, okay, listen, I need to take a pause and say, I need to check, what do you actually need? What are your barriers? Because the world has changed since I came up as a leader.
Yep. And empower them, make them the hero, right? Like your job as the leader is to empower your team and to get them in their highest self and way of being. And you can't do that by making everybody a mini you, or assuming that everybody is just like you, or especially only hiring people you biasly hired because you thought they were like you. Because even if you hired people out of bias that you think are like you, they're not.
Yeah. And I think we talked about this on the last episode. Part of being a leader, part of being a DEI leader is getting out of the way.
Yes.
Because there are so many ways that we unconsciously, unintentionally get in the way of our employees because of our own fears, because of our own biases, because of our need to control, to feel like we're adding value. Sometimes we don't need to be involved in that project that they're doing. You just need to create the environment for them to thrive, and you need to make sure the systems and the resources, and that's part of the systems, by the way, in that pillar, are the resources. And we're not just talking about money. Sometimes it is money because you absolutely need it, but it's about helping them know that you're there, like empowering them to do what they need to do and coming to you when they need the support. Versus you injecting yourself into it and making it the way you would do it and trying to clone yourself. True leadership is you're not a leader until you've created another leader, but that leader doesn't have to lead the same way as you.
People don't think the same way, and that is the beauty of our differences.
So totally. And I think some part of being a DEI leader is seeing everybody as a leader.
Yes. 100%.
If you don't see your employees as a leader, then you are not doing your job in developing them as talent.
Yep. Which is why with the Project Oxygen out of Google, they found that the #1 leadership skill is coaching. Like being able to be that coaching leader, that is your job. Ask the questions, open the mind, guide, direct. But you don't want to activate the psychological immune system. You don't want to be in the expert trap, right? You want the spotlight on them. They are the heroes. Your job is to empower them to do their best work, and you remove roadblocks.
Oh, you just gave me an idea for another podcast episode. I think that we need to make that another, because honestly, we could spend more than 1 hour talking about coaching skills that are going to help you. It makes it easier for you. Because like when we're trying to like answer all the questions, and I went through this actually years ago when I was a team lead of a learning event group, and we had a facilitator come and do a team building for us. And they were asking these questions of how do you solve problems? And every single person on the team said, I asked Jasleen. I was so embarrassed. I was like, what? Me? And in that moment, I realized I was stunting their development. I was getting in the way of their development, and I wasn't creating the system for them to thrive in.
Yeah.
My ego was being stroked by this feeling like I needed to be needed by my team. And like, if I wasn't there, everything was going to fall apart. And where I really felt like I stepped up into the plate in that role was when they didn't need me anymore.
Yes.
When I felt like I could leave and everything would be great. Right. And so I will always remember that moment, because it was like light bulb. And also that person was an ICF coach like us. And that was probably one of the reasons that I started getting drawn to coaching, because I realized this is the true way. This is the true way. It's about eliciting from people what they are meant to do and what is also good for the business, versus trying to force and control, like, okay, this is what we're doing today. You need to do this. You need to do that. Da, 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 and like holding everything together.
Well, that's the moving from the expert leader, which you're maybe middle leadership, right? You are still very much in the day-to-day. Like, you do need to have those hard skills and knowing what your team is doing so that you can teach them and guide them in the skills portion. When you move further out, becoming that spanning leader, and the spanning leader has to know a little about everything, knowing enough to be intelligent in the conversation, to be able to remove roadblocks, to understand where the problems are, but you are no longer hands on the keyboard expert, because that's not your job.
100%. This is one of the things I teach leaders in my coaching program, where there's a whole pillar that's just dedicated to leadership presence. And sometimes the presence of just having a person in the room who's calm, who is listening, who is focusing more on their intentions and their behaviors and their impact than they are on convincing people in the room of their ideas, of controlling the situation. It's really just being there and taking it all in and seeing it from a systems perspective, and asking the right questions instead of giving the answers.
Well, and even removing the morality from the question piece, right? The right question, like, just start with asking questions. Like, if leaders could just remove their egos enough to just ask questions without an agenda, magic happens.
Yep.
And then
we're
seeing
that in our program a lot too, right? Because we're seeing that as we start asking the questions and looking at the data, instead of just making assumptions about this is where the business is, oh my gosh, we need to make this much money by this quarter, or we're going to be in a really bad situation. That's the fear-based leadership, right? And so instead of doing that and saying, okay, here's the data, this is how engaged our workforce is, this is how empowered they feel like to meet their commitments, this is okay. So if we know these are the barriers, instead of like scaring people into performing, what about removing those barriers, which sometimes takes less effort, because some of those barriers are super easy to remove, right? Like, especially to the point when you are the barrier.
Yeah.
When it's just your ego. Out of the way. Like, I mean, I've been that barrier. So that
I've been that barrier. Yeah.
Right. We've been the barrier. And so and we know that often it's because people are, when you're in that fear-based mindset as an individual, as a leader, now all of a sudden your whole workforce is in that mindset. And that's a scary place to be. That's when you start to see the decline of the business.
Yeah. And that's what people want to prevent. All right. So let's move into, we've talked a lot about, why we're doing what we're doing, how we got to this place that we're in right now, which is very specifically focused on helping companies create their DEI ecosystem that is
Mhm.
woven in to their business at a core level to meet those business needs and to succeed in the business, right? We want everybody to thrive. Like,
Mhm.
thriving people make thriving businesses. Like, that's what we're doing now.
Mhm.
So let's talk about what can they expect from us next? Because we're going to take a little bit of time off. Like, very clearly, we're going to take a little bit of time off. We won't have any new episodes for a while. We'll still be around on the social medias and out
Let's
there.
be clear, we won't be off.
Right. We just won't be on the
We're
podcast.
still here.
Yeah.
We're still here doing the work, but yeah, we're gonna take a pause as we've already started creating the content for season 2, and we really want to do this more deliberately. We'd love your feedback. If you have thought of, even as we're talking about this, and you've thought of things that should be a future episode, let us know. You're going to notice, like, even our intro and our outro is going to change, right? So that's one of the things you can expect, because we're really looking at this broader. We're shifting from that matching of talent and organizations to including that, but also expanding it to creating that ecosystem. And so we've already designed what that structure looks like and what the implementation plan looks like. And we're already putting organizations through that. And so by next season, we will have a lot of the learnings from that. And we're already we've got our hypothesis of where it's going to end up, because it's all research and evidence based, and a lot of it has come from our experiences as leaders, as HR professionals. So we're going to be implementing that in our pause. We're planning for the next season, and it's all going to be aligned to those 4 pillars of leadership, education, talent, and systems. So when you think about that, let us know, what are those burning questions for you? Because what we're finding is people are saying, we don't know where to start. It's so overwhelming. It's too much that we just gets put to the back burner. A lot of our leaders see it as a luxury, so it never happens. We invest in something, but then it doesn't have any traction. It's not sustainable. It doesn't actually move the dial on DEI. So season 2 is all about moving the dial on DEI. So whether you're a change agent, a DEI practitioner, a coach, a leader in an organization that wants to be on this journey, we want to cultivate this community, because we can't do it alone. And we want to be sharing of resources. We want to be bringing in the experts who can help us implement this ecosystem. So that's really what we're doing. We're really building that ecosystem and giving you the tools to build that ecosystem. And again, write disruptors in the comment, or go over to LinkedIn and write disruptors in the comment section, so that we will send you that DEI Gap Assessment right away. And it's going to be like a quick 24 question survey, maybe even less, because I might be taking a few of those questions off. But anyways, it'll be really quick, a survey that'll give you an instant report on where your gaps are and where you can start. Because we don't want it to be this overwhelming thing. We want you to be able to get on the journey with really quick, actionable tools that are going to have the biggest impact on not just diversity, equity, and inclusion, but your business as a whole. Right? And so that's part of what is coming next. And then we're also going to be, Alexandria and I are, you've already heard us talk about the leadership competencies today, but we're developing a more formal competency framework, because the next step, we have our DEI Disruptors, our Disruptors DEI certification program. Because again, like, you can go through the program and implement the ecosystem, but then we want to be able to know that it's actually working. We're not being performative about this stuff. We're walking the talk. We want accountability. And so once you're finished that program, we want to be able to test that now the environment has proven to have improved. Your business results have improved. We want to measure that. We want to measure your employee engagement and make sure that that's gone up. We want to make sure that the productivity, all of those metrics, psychological safety, and other things that we've already got in our gap assessment, in our survey, we want to watch all of those go up. So again, it's not a check in the box exercise. It's not falling into that same trap of the DEI programs that fail, but it's really about sustainability and business improvement. And so the competency framework will help support the assessment of, and we're not even just talking about, yes, you as an individual leader can check your competencies, but we're looking at the organization as a whole, as a system, to say, how have we embedded these competencies? How are we ensuring that we're seeing that incline in all of these important metrics, performance being one of them? And what else do we need to be really thinking about and assessing in terms of saying, yes, now you've met the criteria to be a Disruptors DEI leader, and you can proudly put that on your website and feel like you're part of this community who are really disrupting the future of work.
Yeah. And the other piece that's going to come along with that, right? There aren't a lot of DEI certification programs for companies, right? And being able to say, yes, we are prioritizing DEI and here's how we're doing it. The other piece of the certification will be, it's a journey. So there's continuing education and wanting to continue to give back to the community and that connection. And we're all continuing to learn together.
Yeah.
I am always learning.
We're always learning.
Continuous piece that will always be there, which is my favorite because that is my happy space.
Yes. And it honestly, like, okay, Alexandria and I are a bit nerdy about this stuff. But what we want to do is we want to make it fun. We want to bring joy to this, right? Not in a way that we're trying to say, let's pat ourselves on the back for doing this and ignore the barriers and coddle folks. We're not doing that. We're definitely not, because that's going to go backwards in terms of, things that have failed in the past, but really having these thoughtful, engaging conversations. And it will help you have these thoughtful, engaging conversations within your teams. And so that you can just become a better leader. Like even just this morning, like we were late recording this podcast because we're both reading Cast. I think I mentioned that on the last episode as well, by Isabel Wilkinson, who, has like really just enlightened us on things that, even being in this space for so many years, I learned a lot about the caste system in India, being of, a South Asian Indian woman. I've learned things. And so it is about, okay, now that we've got the ecosystem, those educational pieces, how are we continuing to assess our gaps, and and that's being part of this community, because we're just going to keep bringing up these topics and learning together and growing together. And so we can't, again, to that point of we can't do it alone. It has to be a community. That is we've even thought about making that one of our pillars, but I think that's really the foundation of all of this, is building that community. Because there have been, historically, this work has been put on the backs of underrepresented groups.
Yes.
On Black, Indigenous, other people of color, women, LGBTQ+, people who have disabilities. And it's not fair that underrepresented groups are having to do all of this work plus still face oppression. It's just not fair. And so we want to be bringing in all of these perspectives, uplifting the folks who are already doing the great work. Yes. Because there's some things that Alexandria and I can just not replace through just by virtue of who our identities are and what our gaps are and will always be. Because that is part of being a DEI leader. And you can Google standpoint theory, but you really need to embrace standpoint theory in the way that you recognize that no matter what you learn, you will never have the same perspective as the person who belongs to an oppressed group. And I think that goes back to the not being perfect and the decentering of yourself. And that's very liberating too. Yeah. Because then it takes out that fear of feeling like you have to know everything and be perfect. It's about embracing uncertainty, which again is not just a leadership attribute for diversity, equity, inclusion. It's a leadership attribute for being in this volatile economy and business and capitalism. Like, you need to embrace uncertainty.
Mhm.
How are we taking risks?
It is certain is that things will change.
Yes.
The only thing that's certain.
Yep. Change is inevitable. It's one of the coaching principles I abide by. And in embracing that, we take pressure off ourselves. We enable other people to grow as well with us. And yeah, it just, everything becomes easier. I like what you were saying before, Alexandria, about that ease.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not easy, but we are creating ease through the behaviors.
Yeah, things don't, ease and easy are not the same thing. And, that's another word, I think, to deconstruct. And I'm super excited about our next season, all the work that we are doing between now and when we release our next episode. We will be available on LinkedIn. We'll be available on our website. We're still doing gap assessments. If you find us and you've listened to past episodes, you can still go to the website and request a gap assessment. Let's get on the phone and let's figure out how we can help you and find what the gaps are, and then help you prioritize how to solution those and implement a system that fully supports your business and all the people in it.
Yeah. And we remain most active on LinkedIn, so you can DM us there as well. Go to the website. And also, if you're listening to this in podcast form, please subscribe and rate the episode and share this with another leader, change agent, someone who cares about diversity, equity, inclusion, someone who wants to stay in this space of learning and growing with us, because we really want this community to grow, expand our reach and the potential, because we can really change the world through this work. And so please do that. And we'll put if you're watching on LinkedIn, we'll put a link to subscribe to the podcast if you're not listening in podcast form. Yeah. And that's, I think we're just out of time.
We are indeed. We look forward to seeing you when we come back. So keep an eye out for the trailers that release when new episodes will come out. And thank you all for being on this journey with us.
Yeah. And that's a wrap of season 1. Here's to disrupting.
Yes.